what's your take on universal income? Is it a fast track to new communism, capitalism killer, or a possible way out of starvation for humanity? Thank you.
Well, I don't think it addresses the fundamental problem. And I think it's a mirror of the rights responsibility problem. You know, you might say, well, everyone has a right to the basics of life. And first of all, that's a debatable proposition, because the question is, who's going to provide those necessities? And the answer shouldn't be someone else under compulsion. So, because each right comes at the expense of someone else's responsibility. And so you don't want to multiply rights beyond minimum necessity, because you also multiply diverse responsibilities beyond tolerance. But more importantly than that, I would say, is that let's make it more concrete. So let's imagine that as the technological revolution progresses, more and more people will be in danger of being replaced by intelligent machines. Now, we don't know if that's true because it hasn't happened yet, right? And everyone has been predicting that that was going to happen since like 1960, and it hasn't happened. And so there may be an infinite amount of work, and we're never going to run out of work. I suspect that's probably the case. But let's assume that people do get dispossessed as technologies transform, and then we have the problem of the development of people who have no viable means of making a living. And the question might be, well, what's the fundamental problem there? And one answer is, well, they don't have any money. But I actually don't think that that is the fundamental problem. I've had many people in my clinical practice who were unemployed and had money. Now, they didn't have a lot of money, but they had enough money. And enough money to keep privation at bay, let's say, and enough money to, well, that was the rub. Enough money to get themselves into plenty of trouble. And so one of my clients, for example, was I liked him quite a lot, and he had worked in a hospital, and he'd been hurt, and then he got onto painkillers because he'd been hurt, and then he got addicted to painkillers, and then he got addicted to cocaine, and his life took a bad nosedive. And he was actually pretty good unless he had money. But as soon as he had a check, he was gone. He was in a ditch. He was in a bar. He spent all his money, and he was face down in a ditch, and that's where he woke up the next day. And the reason I'm telling you that story is because it wasn't that he didn't have money. That wasn't the problem, really. The problem was that he didn't have a purpose. He didn't have a place anymore. He got thrown out of the structure that would have enabled him to find productive meaning. You know, and you might have said, well, he should have been able to conjure that up on his own, and perhaps that's the case, although he wasn't the world's most sophisticated person. You know, and people vary substantially in their sophistication, and he didn't have a good family. He didn't have a support network around him. He was kind of a lost character in many, many ways. And so it was easy for him to fall out of the world, which is what he did. And providing him with money was not going to fix that. And
What is going to fix that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we have a program. Some of you people might be interested in it. It's part of a suite of online writing programs called the Self-Authoring Suite. It's at selfauthoring.com. And one of the programs is called Future Authoring. And we've experimented with this program in an attempt to address this problem. Okay, so I mentioned to you tonight the idea that we live out a story, and we need a purpose to live out that story properly. And what that implies is that you need a purpose. You need a point. You need an aim. You need a precise aim. You need an aim that's of sufficient nobility. I can't think of any other word. Sufficient nobility to justify your miserable existence even to yourself. And you need to develop that aim. And so we built this program. I started working on it about 15 years ago when I was giving my students exercises to do at university. And one of the exercises I had them do was that they had to pick a small problem, maybe in their family or with their room, and fix it. Not try to fix it, but actually pick a problem that was small that they could fix. Clean up the cigarette butts in the yard outside the residence. Clean the room. I had one kid whose mother had died, and the family got kind of fragmented, and he decided that he was going to take over the maternal duties in the household. And the kids were supposed to write about what happened when they tried to put this into practice, because doing things like that is way more difficult than anybody ever realizes. And so he tried to become mother, and the family needed a mother, and he encountered all sorts of terrible resistance, which is completely unsurprising. I mean, first of all, people in his family were annoyed that he would dare to try to take their dead mother's place, even though he was trying to do it for the best of reasons. And I played with that for a couple of years, and that was very interesting. And then I realized that I was teaching students all these stories about purpose, but nobody had ever had them write a story about their purpose, essentially. So I thought, wasn't that interesting? Here are these kids, they've been in university, they've been in school for 15 years. And no one has ever sat them down and said, well, what sort of character do you want to develop? Who should you be? And why don't you write that out and justify it? 6 pages, something like that, with the same amount of care and attention that you might spend, or even more, on an essay about the War of 1812 or something like that. You think, well, and the more I thought about that, the more flabbergasted, I would say, I became, because I thought, well, how is it possible that we could set up an education system and run people through it for 15 years and never have them forced, so to speak, to figure out who they wanted to be and to justify it in an articulate manner? And so I built this program with my colleagues to help people do that, and I used it in my classes first. And so I thought, okay, well, here's the game, and this is like rule 2. Treat yourself like you're someone responsible for helping. And that doesn't mean be good to yourself. It doesn't mean be nice to yourself. It doesn't mean give yourself an easy life. That isn't actually what you do to people if you care for them. You actually present them with something like an optimal challenge. That's what you do with kids if you love them, is you present them with an optimal challenge so they can develop and grow. So that's what you should do for yourself if you're taking care of yourself. So I thought, okay, well, here's the game. First of all, assume that you're worth taking care of, and that it's your responsibility to do so, even if you don't like yourself very much. And lots of people don't, and they have their reasons, because everybody is very aware of their own flaws, right? Unless you're narcissistic, you're more aware of your own flaws than of anyone else's flaws, and maybe you're not very happy with yourself, and you don't think that you deserve to have an okay life. And so you punish yourself, and you set yourself up for failure, and all of that. And that happens all the time. Or you just don't aim, or you don't have any goals, or you're guilty and resentful and feel that you should be punished. So you have to abandon all that. Treat yourself like you're someone you're responsible for helping. Responsible for helping. Imagine yourself 3 to 5 years into the future. You get to have what you need. If you're taking care of yourself, you can have it. But you have to figure out what it is, because you are not going to get it unless you aim at it. And that's rule 10, is be precise in your speech. And the reason I wrote that rule is because you can be bloody sure that you're not going to hit a target unless you aim at it. And the more precise you make the target, the higher the probability that you'll aim at it, that you'll hit it when you aim at it. So, what do you want? And you think, well, I don't want to even think about what I want, because as soon as I figure out what I want, then I've made clear my conditions for failure. And it's the last thing I'm going to do. And so people envelop themselves in vagueness so they don't have to confront their own failure. But then they fail and just don't notice, except for maybe, 2 decades later when it's too bloody late. And then they're all catastrophically hurt because they wasted their life. It's a very bad plan. It's better just to figure out what you want, and to tell yourself, and then to tell your partner, and to tell the people around you. And maybe you can get it. Or maybe at least while you're struggling towards it, you'll come up with a better plan, which is more likely the case. What do you want from your family? If you could have what was good for you, what do you want from your intimate relationship? How are you going to educate yourself? Because you don't know enough. What do you want for a career or a job? Because not everyone has a career. How are you going to spend your time outside of work in a productive and meaningful manner? How are you going to resist the temptations of drugs and alcohol and sexual misconduct, let's say, because those are the big 3. How are you going to maintain yourself physically and mentally? Well, those are 7 good questions. You can have what you want. What do you want? It's an operational realization of the New Testament principle. Ask and you will receive. Knock and the door will open. And you think, well, no, there's no possibility that that's the case. It's like, actually, it is the case. If you don't specify what you want, you won't get it. And if you specify what you want, and you want it, which means you're willing to make the sacrifices necessary to get it, then the probability that you'll get it expands immensely and miraculously in some sense. Now, of course, it assumes that what you want is within the bounds of appropriate reason, let's say. But you could also dream big, and there's always the possibility that'll work out too. So people answer those questions. Then they write for 15 minutes. Okay, your life is the way you want it to be in 4 years. What does it look like? Write as much as you can. Don't worry about being too accurate. Don't worry about grammar or spelling. Don't worry about getting it right, because you're not going to get it right anyways. Just sketch the damn thing out. If you could have what you wanted, what would it be? And then we have them do the opposite, which is, all right, take stock of yourself for a minute, with all your weaknesses and inadequacies and bitternesses and resentments and sinful tendencies, let's say. Now imagine that you let all of that go and occupy you. Just which little corner of hell would you occupy in 3 to 5 years? Why don't you write about that? And everyone knows where they'd go if they let themselves. And so then you have something to avoid, and you have something to strive for. And that makes you optimally motivated. Because maybe you're afraid, you find out you don't like your job, and you're afraid to change your job. And then you think, oh, well, if I don't change my job, then I'm heading for this little corner of hell that I outlined. Think, well, that's not a very good plan. It's very threatening and stressful to change my job, but it beats the hell out of ending up there. And so then you have your anxieties behind you, pushing you forward instead of in front of you, stopping you cold. And then we ask people to write a plan, to implement their positive vision, to justify it, to come up with a strategy for making it into a real world realization. And we tested that on thousands of university students now. And the upshot was that it decreased the probability that they would drop out of university by 30%. In fact, in Canada, we did it for 90 minutes before kids went to college in the fall. They came to their summer orientation. They either wrote for 90 minutes about something that required writing but that wasn't so relevant, or they wrote out of plan. And it dropped the dropout rate among young men 50% in the first semester. And it had the biggest effect on young men who didn't do that well in high school and who weren't oriented towards a professional career. The consequence of that was that the university used it for 1 year and then stopped doing it, which was not surprising in the least. But the reason that I'm laying out this long story for you is because that's what people need. They need a differentiated and delineated purpose. It's way more important than the money. It isn't money that you need. I know you need money, for God's sake. I'm not ignorant. Everybody needs money. That's not the point here. It's the provision of money without purpose is not helpful. And what people need is a purpose. And they need that to develop that for themselves, obviously, because it's something you have to participate in, but it's something that society has to foster. And the reason they need that purpose is because that's what gives their life meaning. Think about this. Do you really think that you would be satisfied if you had money without responsibility? So what? Okay, got no responsibility. Because that's what everyone wants. It's like, I had a client, he wanted to retire when he was kind of young. And I said, well, what's your retirement dream? He said, well, I envisioned myself on a beach in a tropical island with a margarita in my hand. And I thought, what the hell is that? It's like, okay, let's play that out. Let's be adult about this. Okay, so you go down to, you're this like red-headed white guy. You go down to the Caribbean and you sit on a beach and you're sitting on the beach and you have like 6 margaritas and you're there for like 3 hours. What happens the next day? Okay, you're sunburnt to a crisp, right? So you can't even go out of your hotel room and you're hungover. Okay, and let's say now you hide in your hotel room for 3 or 4 days and you recover, and then you repeat that every day for 3 months. It's like, you go outside and all the locals get away from you because you're the new drunk lecher who's come down from the north. And that's your vision for retirement. It's like, okay, so you have all the money you want, no responsibility. You don't have to take care of yourself. You don't have a partner, so you don't have to take care of them. You don't have any kids. You don't have to take care of them. You don't have a job. It's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do exactly? Sit in the sun and drink margaritas. It's like, there's no, that's not a good vision. You don't want no responsibility. It's wrong. People find the meaning in their life by adopting responsibility. And so, provision of money, you know, they say man does not live by bread alone. And there's wisdom in that. It's like you don't want no responsibility. You might dream about that if you're crushed by your job, but then you have the wrong job, or you have the wrong attitude, or you have the wrong job and the wrong attitude. I don't know what it is. You want lots of responsibility, and society needs to foster that, and we need to help people find their purpose and their place. And that's more to the point than universal income. It's the wrong solution.